Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for being here. What a fantastic turnout we have. Okay, that worked. Thank you all so much for being here. Good news, we have a wonderful program ahead and several speakers to look forward to. The bad news, we've sold out of books already, but yeah, they are easily findable though. I'm sure Blacksburg Books will have more in stock this week. Sheree can tell you about how to get them in other ways. I'm not going to hold things up. The first speaker we have today, I should tell you who I am. I'm Carrie Kopis. I'm the program manager here at Montgomery-Floyd Regional Library. Kareem, our director, sends his regrets. He's been under the weather here lately. Otherwise, he would be here welcoming you as well. But our first speaker here is Christiansburg Mayor Mike Barber. So thank you for being here.
You know, it's a real honor and a pleasure to be able to come here today and honor Miss Nan. Miss Nan was a good friend of mine. She was always amazed that when she called me in my office, I have recognition on my phone, and I could always answer it, "Hi, Miss Nan, how are you?" And she didn't always figure it out, but how I knew. But you know, I enjoyed my conversations with Nan immensely. She was a well-educated, well-thought-out individual when it came to addressing matters that affected the citizens, all of the citizens of the town of Christiansburg. So she and I had a lot of conversations over the years. She loved my wife Earlene at the flower shop. I think she was one of her was one of her biggest customers. So that's that's a good thing. But I noted that Miss Nan came here in 1953. The population of the town of Christiansburg in 1953 was 400 people. Now you throw Cambria in with probably another $150, so we were around 500 or so citizens, and you know now we're over 24,000, and we are the fourth largest town in the state of Virginia. So we have grown a lot, and we have Blacksburg, who is the second largest town in the state. But so there is a lot of growth here, and I see a lot of familiar faces, and I see some people that are probably visiting here, if not for the first time, maybe the first time in a few months or a few years. We have grown leaps and bounds. We are absolutely exploding with parks and recreational services and restaurants and hotels and just about anything anyone needs. We're known as the shopping hub of the New River Valley, which extends to Bluefield, to Withfield, to Hillsfield, to Galax. We're known as a shopping hub, and we are proud of that. But pardon me 1 minute, I dropped what I was going to read. These things don't stick very well. I know I've only got a minute or so, but what I wanted to do is in 2006, the town of Christiansburg adopted a resolution in honor of Miss Nan. If possible, if I have time, I wouldn't mind reading it. Whereas Nannie Berger Hairston, a resident of Montgomery County since 1953, is being recognized for her work, accomplishments, and ideals which have helped to improve the lives of many citizens and promote fairness to all. And whereas Ms. Hairston, through her work and commitment to all people, regardless of color or creed, has set an example that we may look to and inspire to emulate through such kindness as welcoming needy children into her home, encouraging local industry to provide gainful employment and wages to African American women of the community. And whereas Ms. Hairston's lifelong beliefs in knowledge, kindness, and kinship have helped to strengthen our community and to become a demonstrated credo which we all should live by. Ms. Hairston's legacy is is that she is not a testament only to the citizens of the town of Christiansburg or Montgomery County, but the ramifications of her deeds extend far beyond the confines of our political boundaries, as well as into the future. Now be it therefore resolved, on the 7th day of November, the year of 2006, and at a regularly scheduled meeting, the Town Council of the Town of Christiansburg commends Ms. Nannie Berger Hairston for promoting kinship and serving to remind all of us to make a difference in the world in which we live and the communities we call home. And we are proud to call you our neighbor and friend.
Thank you. Next up, we welcome Dan Thorpe, who's here. He has close ties with everyone here, and he's an associate professor at Virginia Tech. We also had his book briefly, Facing Freedom. So, welcome.
Thank you. Many of you I know, but for those that I've not met or didn't see who I was, I've been working for, 10 or 15 years now, I guess, on the history of the African American community here in Montgomery County. And it's in that capacity that I got to know Ms. Hairston something like 15 years ago. I wish I could remember how and where I met her, because I've been trying to think of that, and I can't. But I know that it was early in the process of writing Facing Freedom, because I'm not a native of the area. I've been in Blacksburg for years, but I'm not a native of the area. Knew very few people in Christiansburg, and very few members of the African American community. And so I was very much a stranger trying to start writing this work. And Ms. Hairston immediately embraced me as a serious person, and was willing to begin making introductions and helping me to piece together some of the mysteries of the history of the community. And when I really realized that she had come to trust me, was I wanted to include in the book some photographs that the only place I could find them was in a biography of Captain Schaefer written about 1900 and had been out of print for over a century. She had a copy. And she, giving me a stern warning, let me borrow it so that I could take it and make good photographs of the images and use them in the book. And so at that point I knew that at least I was now finally trusted. And once Facing Freedom was finished, I kept in touch with Ms. Hairston for years, because she was just a delightful person to talk to. And even though I wasn't writing about modern American history, she was a living source of modern American history, at least for this area of the country, if not for the whole country. And so as a historian, I was always just fascinated to listen to her stories. The reason I'm here today, though, is I don't know how many people ever heard the phrase anymore, carrying coals to Newcastle, is to describe doing something that's utterly pointless. That's why I'm here. I am here to introduce a man who absolutely does not need an introduction in Christiansburg. Nevertheless, some of you may not know as much about N.L. Bishop, because I certainly didn't until I did some research. N.L., of course, was born and raised in Christiansburg. He has degrees from New River Community College, Radford University, Virginia Tech, and the Wesleyan Theological Seminary. He apparently liked going to school. Began his career in 1975 as the first African-American member of the Christiansburg Police Department, which is one of the first things that got my attention about NL, because I was interested in the rise of the African-American community, and it took them a century to start moving into positions of public authority in this community. And NL was one of the first, serving for 14 years as a police officer and a criminal investigator before transitioning into health care. In 2010, he became president of the Jefferson College of Health Sciences, serving in that role until it successfully joined with Radford University in 2019, and of course is now at the Radford University Carilion. He then returned to the corporate offices of Carilion as a senior vice president. He's recently retired as a senior vice president at Carilion, but remains active as a part-time community ambassador and a member of the Dean's Cabinet at Virginia Tech Carilion School of Medicine. So, without any further ado, let me introduce N.L. Bishop.
Well, thanks very much for that wonderful introduction. Dan and I got to working together on some projects early on when I found about his interest in looking at things, particularly in Montgomery County, that were happening in the history of the African-American community in the antebellum years. That was resonated with some of my own interests, and so we've done a lot of collaborations, and I've always appreciated it. And particularly the books, his book that talks about, that captures all of that, Facing Freedom. And so I had a great deal of appreciation for that. So it's good to be here and to be here with members of the Hairston family. We go back for a long ways. And to see all of you, I'm not going to call any names because one of the things is, Dan, you said, if I did, I'd have to, because I know just about everybody here, and there's a significant connection. But to Mary with the Board of Supervisors and the mayor and friends and all of these connections, all of these things that I've been able to do, right here in Christiansburg that just happened to come, and I happened to be at the right time at the right place. One of the things I always knew coming up was, and I've had lots of opportunities to have taken jobs elsewhere. And one of the things that was concerning to me was that it looked like for African Americans in this community, if you had something to offer of significance, then it was fine to do it, but you needed to do it elsewhere. Because the opportunities here were just so very limited. I tell the story. I'm really proud of having served as a member of the Christiansburg Police Department. I'm very proud of that. I tell Mike that all the time. But one of the things about it, I started school over at the Friends Elementary School. That's right above Christiansburg Institute and just at the entrance of Christiansburg High School. I went there for 6 years in a segregated school system. So I knew what that was like for the first 6 years of my life. I remember going to the theater and having to go through a separate entrance and sitting up at the balcony. I remember going over to the train station where the segregated capacities that were in place there. I remember seeing the white and colored water fountains. And I said this the last time. One of the things that I did, though, my brother and I, when we would go over there, when we find that nobody else was looking, we go over and taste the white water just to see what. Right. But that was something, So I went to segregated schools until I was 12, and how interesting it was that 8 years later I would be on the police department. And it was not something that I aspired to, but I was recruited. Blacksburg had already done that earlier, 5 years earlier. We just memorialized the great Chief Bill Brown just a few weeks ago. And Blacksburg had already done it. He and I became fast friends as I was learning from him and him serving as a mentor. But to get to the point, one of the things that I had needed at that time was some local mentoring. And I was doing this thing that nobody else had done. And one of the persons that I would talk to would be Mr. John Hairston. I see a lot of heads nodding that people remember Mr. John Hairston and what a fine man he was. So my first connections were with Diane because we were in school together. She was just a year ahead of me, and so we were in school. But out of that, everybody in the community, you knew everybody. So I knew her parents, knew that they were pillars in the community, friends of my parents, and leaders in the community. And so all of that was really good. But as I was trying to figure it out, how do I find my way and how do I make my way in doing this thing that nobody else has done before? Mr. Hairston was one of the persons that I sought out. And as is written in the book, I kind of talk about it. He was a man who was big in physical stature. He was a big man, tall man, but also in character and wisdom. That I always saw and felt really good being in his presence, and the encouragement that I received from him. And so I would go by and have conversations with him as I was trying to navigate and trying to decide, do I stay here or do I take some of these opportunities that are being offered to go elsewhere? But I had something that was calling me to stay here. And I'm just 21 years old, trying to figure it out. But I always had this thing to say, if everybody who looks like me leaves here, how do we ever create models where it looks like where somebody has somebody to point to? Because it's been pointed out, I was a police officer, the first African-American police officer. When I went into long-term care administration, licensed person, I was the only person of color taking the test that day. And all of the firsts that I had done were just tremendous opportunities that had their beginnings from starting with the police department and the encouragement that I got and the support I got from this community. Now, the police department, I want you to know, I was treated very well there. I always will remember this, that I was prepared by my superiors to let me know, they said, you might run into some issues. We may not be able to, we won't be there all the time at the moment. But always know this, we're going to have your back. And I always felt that they did and was very supportive. And so that was a foundation that I got. As a matter of fact, of all the educational things that I've done, one of the things I say about my time with the police department, that was the laboratory that I had to work on and perfect people skills. Because one of the things in doing that kind of work, Chief, am I right? When you're doing that kind of work, you're working with all kinds of people. And I learned, and so part of that had served me well growing up in the church, where all of those kinds of things were already taught. And then I had this opportunity to match that and work that through in the police department. But anyway, Mr. John, we had so many conversations, and it was a real hard thing for me to see, when his health started to decline. But my conversations with him were enormous, and they helped to shape me. When I would be trying to figure things out, I'd go and have conversations with him, and he would help me to sort through and figure things out. Now, along the way, his wife would be there too, and we were friends, and the two of them got me kind of connected and involved in things. I was still in school, working at the police department, had a part-time job, and was a full-time student. Just a little bit busy, but they would wanted me to get involved in some community activities, and told me we need you. I still remember the first time I was asked to MC the Martin Luther King Jr. Observance in January. That year, I said, me? I felt like that was something for more seasoned persons to do here. I was just this young man, but they saw something in me that I hadn't seen in myself, and I did that. And there were many others. And then it got to be the place that Mama Nan and Miss Clara Blake and I would work together on the NAACP banquets. So many of you are at that annual event, and I'm not sure that how many of you remember when it started off right next door at the National Guard Armory. Do you remember when that's where we would have it, and we would do working together, for the catering and to get the tickets and all of those kinds of things. But it was a wonderful experience, and getting to know her, and we would work together. And over the years, that relationship just grew and grew. And then after the passing of Mr. John, then my attention focused on her as I continued to look to her for mentoring, but then also could see that she could use some help. And so we talked often. We talked in the mornings. Sometimes I'd call her, sometimes she'd call me, and we always had this little thing that would begin, I ain't gonna hold you but a minute. And sometimes that could turn into a really long time. My brother and Raymond had the same kind of relationship. So I stayed in touch with her and just enjoyed that relationship and all of the things that I learned. And in the book, I kind of talk about it. One of the things that a fascinating thing and a wonderful thing is this was a couple, like many persons. When I was growing up, you called everybody Mr. and Miss, and so that's what I called them. And then to go through this transition, I still get goosebumps when I talk about this. That transition of people that you've respected and grown up and looked up to, and then the relationship transitions from that vertical one to a more horizontal one, and it's a different relationship. We're friends, not I see you as my parents, but I also see you as friends. And they're telling me they'll call him by the first name. Mr. John would always tell me, he said, "Don't call me John." I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Hairston." So I would work on it, but I never could quite get there. So my nickname I started with calling Big John, and so we had this other little thing when we would end the conversation. I'd be over the house, and as I walk out the door, I turn back around and to say, "Mr. John, you know what? When I grow up, I want to be just like you." And we would do that back and forth to laugh. Then sometimes I said, I'd be ready to leave. I'd say, "Mr. John, you know what?" He said, "Yeah, when you grow up, you want to be just like me." So what a wonderful relationship we had over those many years. And so it was an honor as Sheree and I have been talking about this, and I remember those our first conversations. And when I first heard the idea about a book, I said, if there was ever anybody who deserves to have a book written that talks about that history, because this was a very smart woman who knew how to connect people. Oh my goodness! I mean, I've never seen anything like it. And all of the wonderful things. Larry Bechtel's here. It's been great to have worked with him on a number of things, including the Henrietta Lacks statue that we worked on. It was an honor to have worked with you on that. And then to have been there the night that, the evening that the sculpture was unveiled down in the government center. So there's been this wonderful connection that's taken place over all of these years that I have very deeply appreciated. And Dan, I got to read A Consecrated Life, the life about Captain Schaefer. And mine happened almost in a similar fashion. Some of you may have remembered Walker Campbell, Mr. Walker Campbell. And you know about Miss Campbell and that rich history here. He was a principal over in Floyd. And I asked him, I said, "I'd love to read this book because there are very few." And he took me through the same drill that you did. He said, "Now I'm going to let you have this, boy. But you got to keep this." And what a wonderful history that I picked up from that. And its connection to Schaefer and all of the changes and the wonderful things that happened after that. So with that, I just wanted to say how much of a pleasure it was to have been asked to write the foreword for this. And then one of the things that I always talk about is it was such a special thing. I always wanted my grandchildren and children to understand the importance of being connected in the community. I know how much I was influenced, but I always liked, my grandparents were dead the day when I was born. So I always was gravitated to other people's grandparents and older people. So I've always had an affinity in that way. And so one of the last, at the Christmas before she passed, one of the most special things that had happened, on Christmas Eve, I took my granddaughters with me, and we went over to the house to see her on Christmas Eve. And we went in and spent some time with her. And we sang Christmas carols with her. And it was a very, very special occasion. Something that I'd always look forward to doing. And as I said in the book, we sang, I still remember, we concluded singing Silent Night. And she sang the alto part. And when it was over, I've got a video that shows it. I think I've sent it to you. And where she looks over, she says, "Y'all didn't know Grandma could sing, did you?" Such was this very, very special woman. And in the end, one of the things I talked about, something that happened often, was when she was going to tell me something serious that she wanted to have my full attention, she put her hand on my hand or put her hand up on my shoulder and looked at me in the eye, and she said, "Now listen, I'm going to tell you this, because I talk to you like you're one of my own." to be considered one of Nan's own is a very special thing. And I'll conclude with that unless there are any questions anybody has. Okay, all right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bishop. Now, on to Sheree. Sheree is an oral historian with more than 30 years of experience co-creating oral histories and directing oral history projects. She moved from Austin, Texas to Southwest Virginia in the Blue Ridge Mountains in 2010 and began her work in this region as well as consulting on projects with institutions in Washington, D.C. and beyond. Sheree conducted the Oral History Project with Nannie Hairston in 2015 to 2016, and of course is the author of Southwest Virginia civil rights leader Nannie Berger Hairston and Oral History. She's the author of African American Railroad Workers of Roanoke, Oral Histories of the Norfolk and Western, based on her interviews with the railroad workers. She holds a MA and is ABD in American Studies from the University of Texas at Austin. She's worked with various institutions over the course of her career, including NASA, Johnson Space Center, the Library of Congress, the University of Texas School of Law, the National Institutes of Health, the University of Virginia, the Historical Society of Western Virginia, and the National Museum of Women in the Arts. She lives with her husband in Roanoke. So welcome, Sheree.
Well, I haven't learned my lesson yet not to follow N.L. Bishop. Because I'm going to read my talk, so it will be very different. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Carrie, for that introduction, and to the Montgomery-Floyd Regional Library. I'd also like to thank all the funders of the original Oral History Project that made this book possible. A full list is available in the book in my acknowledgments. And I'm grateful to the Library Foundation for your recent gift toward this publication. Also, I'd like to express my gratitude to Dan Thorpe, whose scholarship I found invaluable in writing my book, and to June Sayers, who has retired from the library but has not retired from this project. N.L. Bishop, thank you for your words today and for your beautiful foreword. I'd like to give a very special thank you to the Hairston family. Colette Hairston Hash and her husband Gary Hash, and Diane Hairston Penn and Benjamin Penn were kind and generous and allowed me special access to Mrs. Hairston's archive of photographs and documents. Can you please stand? Thank you. First and foremost, though, I am grateful to Nannie Berger Hairston, who summoned me to help her tell her story and eventually to write her book. I'm grateful to her for choosing me, for her candor, her excellent memory, her guidance, her friendship, and most of all, her trust in me to get the story right and true. It is fitting that both launches of my book, honoring Mrs. Hairston, have taken place during Black History Month. And let me know if you can't hear me back there. Okay, thank you. And of course, today starts Women's History Month. I feel, though, I must strongly state, African American history is American history. And I admit that these last few weeks preparing this talk has been difficult. It was difficult preparing for my February 8th launch talk, and things have only gotten worse since then. My focus has been disturbed by the chaos and dismantling of programs that have taken several generations of civil rights activists fighting for, working for, and negotiating to achieve. One of the most symbolically important for our discussion today is the executive order that struck down a 1965 Equal Employment Opportunity Order outlawing discrimination based on race, gender, and other protected criteria, which was part of the sweeping civil rights legislation of the 1960s, and the elimination of diversity, equity, and inclusion federal programs. Just this week, agencies in the federal government began dismantling offices that enforce civil rights laws and protect workers' rights. Of course, the push against teaching African American history in our public schools and universities has been going on for some time. The backlash against the gains made by the civil rights movement and other movements for equality and social justice was not lost on Nannie Hairston. Of course, not much was. And although it was challenging to try and find calm moments to focus on what I wanted to say today, the only thing that helped me was reminding myself that the life of Nannie Berger Hairston can stand as a role model for all of us living in this perilous time, and her words can help point us in the direction of love in action. So today I'm going to be talking about Nannie Hairston's life, and I'll be sharing her words. But first, I'd like to briefly say a few words about the process of writing the book. If you're curious to know more, you can find more information in my afterword, How I Came to Tell Nannie Berger Hairston's Story. I met with Mrs. Hairston in December of 2014 after she read my book on African American railroad workers and asked to meet me. We agreed to work together on the project of recording her life history. The Montgomery-Floyd Regional Library hired me to conduct the oral history project, and June and I set about writing grants to local and state organizations and agencies. We were fortunate to receive our funding, and Mrs. Hairston and I met over a 6-month period, from August 2015 to January 2016, for a total of 16 sessions and 20 interview hours. We met at her home in Christiansburg, and our sessions were, oh, by the way, this is my in-house title of my book. We met at her home in Christiansburg, and our sessions were chronologically based but open-ended in scope, and indeed included subjects such as her childhood, family background, education, recreation, mentors, siblings, communities in which she lived, instances of racism, the effects of Jim Crow, World War II and Korea, the Civil Rights Act, integration, childbirth, employment, voting, the Civil Rights Movement, her involvement in organizations including the NAACP and the Democratic Party, her children's education, the church's role in her life, especially Schaefer Memorial Baptist Church, and her involvement with the Christiansburg Institute and the Hill School, as well as the community at large. In telling her own story, she told her husband John Hairston's story, as their lives were entwined for more than 70 years. And she also told the story of her family and children. We met when she was 94 years old, but as I said, her memory was sharp, and she interspersed her stories with photographs and documents that she pulled from her many scrapbooks that she kept to document her life. She would say things like, "I do have some pictures to prove some of the things I've been telling you." I think it makes it nice, whether you're writing a book or if you're telling a story. Our sessions were professionally transcribed, and I edited them for accuracy and readability, while being careful to preserve her meaning. Usually at this juncture in an oral history project, I ask the interviewee to review the transcripts either with a printed copy or a digital copy. But because of Mrs. Hairston's age, I decided to read the transcripts aloud to her and annotate them with her additions, deletions, and edits as we went along. This was the first time in my 30-some-odd year career that I had done that. It was there were 700 pages, but very fulfilling process. We finished our editing sessions at the end of 2016, and I made her corrections and changes for the final transcript. She signed the release form in March of 2017. It was an interesting process for me, the experience of conducting the interviews and then re-experiencing them and reading them to her. And I believe it heightened the power of the stories and their poignancy. Mrs. Hairston agreed. Quote, "I can't explain to you what this has meant, that I didn't feel that what we were doing, people were sending cards to us, and we were thanking them, but I had no idea that all of this was going to come after. But since it has, then I go back over when you leave, or I go to bed at night, and it's almost like visiting someone. You're visiting your own life," unquote. Excuse me. Mrs. Hairston died on July 14, 2017, at the age of 95, a fact that was devastating for her family, for her community, and for me. It was one of the great honors of my life to listen to and record Mrs. Hairston's life story, and I'm grateful that we had that time together and that her memories were preserved. Some of the terms that were used to memorialize her at the time were queenly, freedom fighter, civil rights icon, and my own, missionary of love and social justice. I remember one of the speakers at her service suggested that it may take some time and distance to be able to adequately appreciate her legacy. Well, it did take me about 5 years after her death before I was able to start working on the book. Mrs. Hairston always referred to the work we did together as her book, not her oral history. And so I always knew I would get back to it. Over the last few years, after signing a contract with a publisher, I went back to the transcripts to find the stories that tell the story of her life best, and many times they are the stories she wanted to be told. The family generously shared her archive with me. I went through many boxes of scrapbooks filled with articles, letters, photographs, certificates, and programs. I also conducted research in libraries across Virginia and West Virginia and was able to locate even more archival material. I enlisted the help of Dr. Bishop, who graciously agreed to write the foreword, which enhances the publication greatly. I began to piece the book together. I wrote an introduction that sets her story in time and place. The chapters are arranged chronologically, and in each chapter I've written a preface that sets each phase of her life in context. The chapters themselves, though, are in her words. Let's get back then to Nannie Hairston's words and life. Imagine this story, if you will. You were born black and female in deep Appalachia in the American South in the early 20th century, just 50 some odd years beyond the end of the Civil War and slavery. You moved from town to town because your father is a coal miner and worked in mines without unions. You were bused to a segregated one-room schoolhouse where you had to wait in the cold, coming and going. You lived through the Great Depression. You graduate from high school, marry, and start raising your children. Your husband is a coal miner and loses his job. So you move to another area in the South and know no one. The area is very restrictive. You can't eat in most of the restaurants. You can't go to the movies. Your children are sent to a segregated school with old textbooks, and you only have the lowest paid jobs available to you. You know your place. And yet, because of your background and how you were taught to love, not hate, and get involved and give back to your community, you become a leader and pillar of that community. You advocate for change and civil rights and opportunities for all. You raise a family who also grow up to fight for civil rights and social justice. You have a bust carved in your likeness and placed in the county's government center. You become friends with mayors and senators, visit the White House and receive letters from governors and even presidents. You become an icon, sought after for your advice and beloved by blacks and whites, young and old, Democrats and Republicans, men and women, preachers and sinners, office holders and newcomers, rich and poor. Your voice is the voice for love, a voice this country so desperately needs right now. This is the story of Nannie Berger Hairston. There's not time today to go into detail that I do in the book about the different phases of Mrs. Hairston's life. But let me try and unpack the overarching story I just laid out with some dates and definition. She was born in 1921 and grew up in the coal camps of West Virginia. She married her husband, John Hairston, in 1941 and spent her early married life in those same coal camps, while John, her true partner in all of her life's activities, worked in the coal mines and also served his country in World War II and Korea. They moved to Christiansburg in 1953 when the coal mines closed, where they bought a home and raised their 4 daughters. And Mrs. Hairston lived in their home for over 60 years. They arrived at the height of Jim Crow and became agents of change for civil rights through joining local organizations such as the NAACP and the Democratic Party, while maintaining a multi-generational household that included Nannie's parents, their 4 daughters, and many times included other family members and even other members of the community, such as African American students who had been accepted at Virginia Tech but could not live on campus. Unfortunately, there were only a few types of work that were available to her because of her race. She worked briefly as a maid, a factory worker, an insurance agent, and finally she was hired at the Radford Army Ammunition Plant, where she retired after 20 years in 1983. Over this period of time, the Hairstons became respected leaders in the community, and their home became a gathering place for politicians seeking the Hairstons' approval and approbation, for local office holders seeking advice, for young and upcoming African Americans seeking to find their way in ways in which to contribute. John and Nannie Hairston each won many accolades, awards, and honors. A shortened list of Mrs. Hairston include Mother of the Year, an award she cherished, Citizen of the Year, Virginia Women of Distinction Award, Strong Men and Women in Virginia History, and the NAACP Nannie B. Hairston Community Service Award, an award that was created in her honor in 1991. To date, there have been more than 30 annual award winners. This photograph is from 2011 when Lindsay West, who served on the Montgomery County Board of Supervisors, as well as in other community positions, won the award. She had a bust in her likeness created by local sculptor and author Larry Bechtel and placed in Montgomery County Government Center. And the Hairstons were honored with an official John T. and Nannie B. Hairston Day in Christiansburg, celebrated every year on June 14th, John Hairston's birthday and John and Nannie's wedding anniversary. What I'd like to do today is share a few flashpoints in her life that stand out to me as emblematic of the strength and resilience that make her story and voice so powerful and a beacon to us now. Although her childhood was marked by a time of heightened racism and violence against African Americans, and in addition, she was only 10 years old when the Great Depression began, she remembers her childhood fondly, especially the love she was taught and was surrounded by at home. It was a love that nurtured and protected her so that she had the courage to imagine and hope for her future and to dream. As Desmond Tutu has said, hope is being able to see that there is light despite all the darkness. She told me, quote, "I think I told you the story when I was young. I used to sit in the swing. On our front porch, the swing went this way and the steps were there, where you walk up on the front porch. You went on the front porch as you come out the door and walked that way. I would be sitting in the swing, and when the engineer on the train, who was coming to get the coal to take it to whatever state that they were going to sell it to, I would be swinging, and the engineer would honk the horn on the engine. We were that close to the railroad, but they could see me, and he would honk, then pull it down, and I always said to myself, I'm on my way to Washington, to the White House," unquote. That little girl swinging on the porch swing and dreaming of going to the White House did go to the White House when she was invited by President Jimmy Carter in 1980. Not only was love taught at home, but her mother, Bessie Robinson Berger, modeled through her bold actions and community and political activism that you can make a difference in the world and strive to make the world a better place. Quote, "It was when her smaller children were in grade school and had to ride the same bus. They would have to go and wait until the teacher came in at 8 o'clock. That's about 2 hours and something, waiting in the cold. She was tired. I never dreamed that until these last years," I said. "Well, my mother was a Rosa Parks." She said, "I'm tired," and she pawned her sewing machine to Mr. Jesse Pugh. I'll never forget him. He had a car with a thing called a rumble seat in the back. He picked the sewing machine up with another man helping him and put it in his car and let my mother have $5 to pay somebody to carry her to the school board to make her complaint. She went by herself. I didn't think too much of it, really, until Miss June wrote the letter to the Library of Virginia in Richmond for the Strong Men and Women Award. I said, "That's how you can feel what happened to the colored race. We have strong colored. Now we're saying Afro-American women. But if you didn't have a strong mother, I can understand why you are like you are. We were just fortunate." And from what I've heard, the time frame was about a month. Somebody said, "Mama, there goes a McDowell County truck with lumber on it." That's when they started hauling the lumber to get ready to build a black school right there in Faraday, West Virginia. The Hairstons moved to Christiansburg in 1953. In the 1950s and the early 1960s, Christiansburg was a segregated community dominated by Jim Crow, as was the case all across the South. However, there were some advantages for African Americans living in Christiansburg at the time. There was a vibrant downtown area with thriving black businesses, and the Christiansburg Institute was also located here. With its rich history as the only educational institution for African Americans in Southwest Virginia. But as Mrs. Hairston told me, quote, "Always remember this, where you could go, I couldn't," unquote. John and Nannie Hairston joined with like-minded individuals in the community and went to work in the business of building community and making the community better. As Mrs. Hairston told me many times, her parents taught her, quote, "Wherever you move, be a part of the community," unquote. The Hairstons joined Schaefer Memorial Baptist Church, the local NAACP, the local Democratic Party, the PTA, and later the Virginia Council on Human Relations. She joined the Montgomery County League of Women Voters, of which she was a founding member, and the local chapter of the United Way. They both served on many boards, with the Christiansburg Community Center Board being one that they served on until the end of their lives and was close to their hearts. One of the jobs Nannie Hairston had in Christiansburg in the early 1960s, when good-paying jobs were denied to African Americans because of race, was as a seamstress at the Christiansburg Garment Factory. Not only did she get a job there after being told that the company didn't hire blacks, but she brought in numerous friends and they got jobs there as well. She told me about an incident that exemplifies Nannie Hairston's belief in fairness and working toward a goal of equality. There was a company picnic coming up and the manager told them they could not come because they were black. Quote, "So I go back to Miss Jones and all the other women that I can't remember their names now. Most of them are dead. I said, he's going to give us money for however many are in our family, where we can go and have our own picnic. And I told them whatever amount it was, and one of them said, "Oh boy, we'll have a good time. That's a lot of money, isn't it?" I said, "Yes, but our purpose is not for that. We came here to get a job and to work and try to help take care of our family. And we didn't come here for this. If they would allow us to go to the picnic, it would be fine. But to have it like they have it, I don't want it. I don't want the money, and I could use it." And one of the ladies said, "Oh, we'll just take the man's money and we don't care." I said, "Well, you think about it. Do you want to help yourself for tomorrow or just for today? When they came back, I said, we have to give him an answer. Mr. Phillips has to have an answer. They said, well, since you got us the jobs here, I guess we'll go along with you. And it ended up that we didn't go to the picnic. And the next year they had it so we could go to the picnic with them. Mrs. Hairston told me one of her mottos was, if you can't do it out of love, you need to stop. She took that statement to heart and put it in action. She learned it from her family. Quote, we couldn't go in hotels and sleep. We couldn't go in to eat in the restaurant that would serve you. You know you couldn't sit down. You could go in and buy some and come out. But some wouldn't even sell to you. That's the way I look at life. If you haven't been taught to love instead of hate, you would have a miserable life going through the world hating people for what they have done and done to your grandparents and your great-grands. But I happen to be fortunate enough to have parents that didn't carry that hate. What was passed on to us has been a beautiful life for me and my children. The legacy that Nan and John Hairston left their community is one of accomplishing things for the good and making the community a better place. Their voices, her voice, became synonymous with social justice for African Americans, yes, but also for anyone who needed help in the community. And they worked with others to ensure that fighting for that equality and justice was done without violence. Quote, I try to tell people now sometimes, you've got to have a way of knowing how to address yourself to people to get something done. A lot of us now, we see the newspaper, it looks like the violence is, we aren't teaching how not to have it. We're just going in. It doesn't matter, just everybody on that side of the fence or this side of the fence, unquote. John and Nannie Hairston spent their lives reaching across that fence. They were coalition and bridge builders. They believed in and tried to help create, in their own world, Martin Luther King Jr.'s vision of the beloved community, a society governed not by violence or conflict, but by love. The years between 1954 and 1965 have been called the heroic age of the civil rights movement. Nannie and John Hairston were foot soldiers in that movement who believed in the ideals of equality, liberty, and justice for all, who believed in the promise of America and worked to make it real. Finally, then, I have fulfilled my promise to her 10 years after our first meeting, and I'm sharing with the world, with you, the remarkable life of Nannie Berger Hairston, although I know many in here already know about that life. I'm sharing in her own words so that people can learn about her accomplishments, her dignity, her grace, and her wisdom. This book is Nannie Hairston's personal story, a life filled with love, heartache, achievements, difficulties, happy moments, and tragedy, as is true in any life. But as she was an African American woman living in the South who came of age during the middle of the 20th century, the story also includes the challenges of living under the racist restrictions of Jim Crow and the valiant struggle for equal rights. It is my hope that her story shows that the struggle for equality and social justice was fought on many fronts, including right here in Southwest Virginia, and by a woman who believed in the power of love. It is a heroic story. And the fight in this country to form a more perfect union based on the values our country was founded on is not over. Nannie Berger Hairston set the bar high, but left us a clear path. May we follow in her footsteps and have a life with the world. Lastly, early in this talk, I mentioned how it was a great honor for me to record Mrs. Hairston's story. It is an even greater honor now to have completed the book. Yes, I crafted it by choosing the interview excerpts, arranging them, conducting the research, writing the context for, and choosing which photographs to include. But in the majority of these pages, Mrs. Hairston tells her own story. So from my perspective, the book was written with a shared authority, a concept in the field of oral history that has come to mean how the process and product of oral history can have a shared authorship. To that end, and to honor our joint authorship, the royalties I receive from the sales of the book will be shared with the John T. and Nannie B. Hairston Endowed Scholarship Fund at the New River Community College. It is one way in which I can honor her memory. Thank you.